The New York Giants made several critical offseason decisions this year that might very well have been game changers.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. I am your host, Patricia Traina, and today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you by Odoo. Great organizations win because operations matter, and that's why you should get Odoo. Try for free at odoo.com/lockedon. That's odoo.com/Locked On. All right, Giant fans, on today's episode of Locked On Giants, we're going to take a look at some turning points made in the offseason. And I'm kind of going to phrase them as what-if scenarios. What if the Giants hadn't done A, B, C, and D? Where would they be? So I've got three that I think are key. So we'll look at that in the first segment. Then in the second segment, we've got some questions that are unanswered with the Giants having ended their spring practices last week. Some questions that, depending on the answers, it's going to really tell us a lot about the potential direction of this football team. So we'll look at that in segment 2. And then in segment 3, the Giants aren't going to be involved in the supplemental draft this year, but I thought it would be kind of fun to go back and take a look back at the Giants' history in the supplemental draft. It's been kind of a mixed bag, bordering on disastrous, but we'll take a look at that, and I'll give you a little bit of history in segment number 3. So let's get right into everything. All right, so the Giants made several critical offseason decisions, from hiring John Harbaugh to trading Dexter Lawrence and so forth. So let's take a look at the flip side of that. What if some of these critical offseason decisions hadn't come to fruition? We'll start with the hiring of Harbaugh. Now, the moment that John Harbaugh became available, it was pretty much Harbaugh or bust for the Giants. They put out a full court press to get him, and of course they got him, the Giants being the only team that Harbaugh interviewed with for the head coaching job. But let's say Harbaugh either wasn't interested or the Ravens hadn't decided to fire him. What would have happened in that case? I firmly believe that had the Giants not gotten Harbaugh, they would have gone with either Kevin Stefanski or Mike McCarthy. And here's why I say that. The Giants were looking for an experienced head coach. McCarthy and Stefanski both fit that bill. The younger head coaches, there might be some gems amongst like guys like Jesse Minter and whatnot, but the Giants, they had gone down that path several times before with first-time head coaches, and it didn't really pan out for them. So they finally kind of made a decision, I guess, as an organization to say, we want somebody who has experience, somebody who can not only just talk a good game about wanting to win, and that's our goal, but have an idea how to get there. Now, what's kind of interesting is, would the Giants have ceded some of the power that they ended up ceding to John Harbaugh to Kevin Stefanski or Mike McCarthy? I don't think Stefanski would have, for example, gotten the control that John Harbaugh got. Stefanski, as good of a coach as he is, and yes, he is a good coach despite what happened in Cleveland, which is just, that organization leaves us something to be desired about how it's run and put together. But Stefanski, I don't think, would have gotten that power. McCarthy might have. Now, would he have insisted on it? That I don't know. But I think had he asked for it, maybe he would have gotten it. At the end of the day, though, the Giants got a coach in John Harbaugh who not only knew what he wanted, who knew how to put together a winning program, but so far, so good for the most part. So that what-if scenario, what if the Giants hadn't hired him? I don't know if there would have been as much enthusiasm as there is right now over the Giants' direction. There might have been, but, we've seen it before with new coaches where a new guy comes in and there's a lot of enthusiasm, but I don't recall it ever being this high. And that's a great thing for Giant fans who have just been absolutely, miserable the last several years, what with the Giants just not doing very well. So Harbaugh's in. We don't have to worry about it. All right, the next big thing that I think was a turning point for the Giants was the Dexter Lawrence trade. Now, As information came out, it was pretty obvious that Dexter, it wasn't about money for him. He was just done with the Giants. He was tired of the losing. He was tired of, just all the things that kind of built up over the years. So he didn't want to be here. And the Giants were like, okay, you don't want to be here. We'll move you if we get a good deal. So they ended up getting the 10th overall pick from the Cincinnati Bengals, who were willing to trade for him. Now, here's why that is so significant, because a lot of people, they were kind of wringing their hands and saying, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Dexter Lawrence isn't on the defensive line anymore. How are we going to replace him? I've said many, many times that you don't replace Dexter Lawrence. That's just a unique talent. You don't replace him. What the Giants are looking to do from the defensive line perspective is they have a committee, if you will, and that committee is set up in such a way to where there shouldn't be that big of a drop-off if, say, for example, DJ Reader has to come off the field for a rest and his backup, whoever that might be, comes on. They also have more versatile guys to where they can mix and match them. So maybe you might see, if he makes the team, you might see like a Fotu. He might end up playing a little bit of nose tackle in the, let's say, the goal line situations. They didn't have that before. It was pretty much Dexter and everybody else. Now you don't have that scenario. So potentially the defensive line might be more efficient moving forward, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But here's the other aspect of trading Dexter Lawrence and why this kind of benefits the Giants. The Giants were able to address the offensive line. You don't think for a second that if the Giants don't have that 10th pick in the draft, they probably don't get Francis Mauigoa, which means now they have a hole on their defense, their offensive line. Because remember, they tried to sign Elijah Vera Tucker, and they were unsuccessful. So it was either draft somebody or bring back Greg Van Roten or another veteran who was still out there. By getting Francis Mauigoa, the Giants are now set at the right side of their offensive line, which was a big question mark coming into the offseason. They were able to bring back Jermaine Illuminor. They brought in Mauigoa. Now they have the right side of that offensive line solidified for the next 3 years plus. So if the Dexter Lawrence trade doesn't happen, chances are the Giants go in a totally different direction at that point. Speaking of Illuminor, that's my next point here. If the Giants don't re-sign Jermaine Illuminor, who was one of the top 3 free agents for the team, what do they do at right tackle? Now, maybe they would have rolled with Marcus Bowe at the position. Maybe they would have had to go out and get a totally different person for the job. But they kept their bookend tackles together. And if they don't re-sign Jermaine Illuminor, that doesn't happen. I mean, the Giants, for the first time, and I can't tell you how long, they have 2 solid offensive tackles in Andrew Thomas and Jermaine Illuminor. That right there is assuring, because tackles are hard to find. Really good tackles are hard to find. It's a little easier to find guards and centers. So the Giants, basically, in re-signing Jermaine Illuminor, they ensured themselves that they have a solid plan in place for the offensive tackle spot, which is so key on that offensive line. And again, if that doesn't happen, if you say, well, what if they hadn't done it? Who knows how they would have addressed that position, especially given how they were spending money and, signing guys mainly to 1-year deals, veteran salary benefit deals, a lot of them being. So that was a big problem taken off the Giants' plate, and one that worked out to their advantage. All right, Giant fans, coming up next, we're going to take a look at the biggest unanswered questions as of the end of the spring program for the Giants and ahead of training camp. So that's coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans, workplace chaos can show up fast. The problem is that finding the right candidate can take a lot more time than most businesses can afford. That's where Indeed Sponsored Jobs comes in. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach candidates who actually fit what you're looking for based on skills, experience, and location. And finding the right person can make all the difference in the world, whether it's building a business or building a winning team. You need to find that right person. And some of the best moves that the best organizations make aren't always the splashiest ones. Sometimes it's just finding that person who just fits exactly what the team needs at that particular moment. And that's what stood out about the Giants hiring of Donna Ponte, the salary cap strategist. Not really a splashy move, but a key move that the Giants really needed to make. And with Indeed sponsored jobs, they help connect organizations with candidates who are the right fit from the start. So go on and spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs, and listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get their job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support the Locked On Giants podcast by saying that you heard about Indeed on this show. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs.
This show is brought to you by our friends at Rugiet. The NHL championship might be in the books, but all throughout that NHL final series, every shift mattered. Every moment was more intense, and everything came down to execution when the pressure is at its highest. And just like those athletes on the ice who had to be ready whenever the puck dropped, a lot of guys want to have that same sense of readiness and confidence in their own lives too. And that's where our friends over at Rugiet come in. They offer a modern performance-focused treatment that's designed to help you be ready when it matters the most. And their top option, Rugiet Ready, is designed to just be a simple mint that dissolves under your tongue, has effects that kick in within about 15 minutes and can last up to 36 hours. So you're always ready whenever the moment arises. Head over to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNHL to get 15% off of your ED treatment. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNHL for 15% off. Rugiet, performance medicine for men.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network in America. We are also celebrating our 10-year anniversary all year long. Hard to believe that it's been 10 years, and I hope you were able to check out Tuesday's show in which we celebrated the 10th anniversary of Locked On. I am your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI. And welcome to the Everydayer Club members, to the Blue Crew, to our newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast, or if we happen to be the first podcast you're checking in with, we appreciate that as well. So thank you. All right, let's take a look at the most burning questions, unanswered questions, where ahead of training camp for the Giants. And there's really 4, in my opinion, that I'm kind of curious to see how they play out. Number 1, what is going to be the status of Malik Neighbors? Now, I am not anticipating Malik taking part in training camp at all. I would be surprised if he doesn't start the summer on PUP, and if I think he's going to stay on PUP basically the whole summer. But keeping in mind that Joe Shane and John Harbaugh of late have basically said, he's about 70 to 80% of the way through, and we still feel confident that he's going to be ready to go. Folks, in my opinion, until I see him out there doing something on the field, whether it's jogging, whether it's working with a trainer on the side, I don't share that optimism. Now, I don't mean to be a negative Nelly. I'm being a realist here. Malik has been doing most of his rehab inside the building with machines and whatnot. Once he gets out there and he starts running and cutting and doing all the stuff that he's going to need to do on the football field, then I might feel a little bit better about his chances of being ready for week 1. He does have time on his side, all right? He has about 6 weeks now until the start of training camp, and I'm sure they're going to take him very slowly. But, here's the other thing I'm going to say about this whole situation. While I appreciate the updates that the Giants are trying to give about Malik, and answering the questions, to put a percentage on the kid and say he's about 70 to 80% of the way through, I don't know if the kid necessarily needs that kind of pressure. Don't say, oh, as of mid-June, he's 80% of the way through his rehab, because then you would expect over the next several weeks he should be 90, 95%, if not closer to 100% to being back. And if he's not back, then you kind of look stupid for putting that percentage down. So believe it or not, this is one area where I kind of agree with Brian Dable about not putting percentages on or predicting when a guy was going to be back, because you put pressure on the guy to meet that expectation. So that being said, Malik Neighbors, he's always said it. He said, when I'm ready, I'm ready. And whether he's ready for the start of training camp, which again, I don't think will be the case, or week 1 or week 5 or whatever, when he's ready, let him be 100% ready, both physically and mentally, to come back and be the Malik Neighbors that we have all come to appreciate. Item number 2, unanswered questions. Is what we saw with Deonte Banks in the spring for real? Was it a mirage, or is it just, is it the real thing? Now, Deonte Banks, during the spring practices that were open to the media, I thought, and I'm sure there are others in the media who might agree with me, I thought Deonte Banks had one of the best springs he's had in a while, probably one of the best springs of any of the players that might be quote-unquote bubble guys. Is that a mirage, or is this Deonte Banks finally turning the corner? Now, the reason why I bring up that question is because in the past, Jalen Hyatt would have some really, really nice spring showings, and then come training camp, everything would fall apart. So I don't want to get too high on Deonte Banks and whether or not he is in a position to lead this competition for CB2. But that's a question that's going to need to be answered, because once the pads go on, once you start having live contact, that's going to separate what's real versus what was a mirage. So fingers crossed, because I still say Deonte Banks is probably one of the most talented cornerbacks on that team. I know everybody's like, okay, Colton Hood is the future, but Colton Hood, based on what I saw in the spring, might not be ready for full-time duty yet. Now, that could change, obviously, as we go through training camp, but right now, I'd be reluctant to say he's the winner or even in the lead for the cornerback 2 spot. Okay, Jackson Dart. Now, I've talked about this before on the show, how Jackson Dart, he is learning new things that he hadn't necessarily done before as a rookie or in college, for that matter. Amongst them, working under center, where you're now talking totally different footwork, totally different mechanics. Your vision of the field is a little bit different. It's an adjustment that you have to make. Jackson Dart also continued to have struggles during the spring with the deep ball. Now, I'm not overly worried about that, because that could just be a matter of him getting used to these new receivers that he has. And I think the more he throws to them, the more he's going to be able to understand and develop a feel for where they're going to be and when they're going to be there. The fact that the Giants brought in taller receivers for Jackson Dart, that's going to help him as well, because now you're talking guys with bigger catch radiuses. So if Jackson Dart is not exactly on target with his passes, not a big deal, because these guys should be able to reach out and haul in anything that might be off target. The big thing for him is going to be, like I said, working under center, because when you take the ball and you drop back, now you're turning your back to the defense just a little bit, and things can change. So for Jackson Dart, it's not like he's going to be seeing everything develop in front of him. He's going to turn his back momentarily, turn back, and it's going to be like, oh, okay, who's where? I can't lose sight of where the mic is. I can't lose sight of where this cornerback is, or anything like that. So that's going to be a challenge for him. But again, the more reps he gets in that regard, I think he should be fine. But still, it's a question, and it's on the list. So, all right, the last question on the list, believe it or not, is the kicking competition truly over? Now, Dominic Zavada was perfect in the practices that were open to the media. Ben Sauls was not. So you would think, okay, kicking competition is over. Why even continue? Cut Ben Sauls, bring in somebody else at a different position and call it a day. No, not quite, folks. Number one, there's the matter of kickoffs. We haven't really seen Sauls and Zavada do a whole lot with kickoffs, and that is also important. Now, before anybody says, oh, just let Jordan Stout, the punter, do that. Jordan Stout, although he has done kickoffs in his career, that is not his main thing. He hasn't done it as much as you think he has. Could that change? Sure, it can. If you're looking to have an advantage, you want to have your kicker do that. You want to have him work on directional kicking. And that's something we haven't seen in this kicking competition. Scoring is important, but you also have to remember something. The Giants' objective, they don't want to have to be trying 50-plus yard field goals. They want to be more efficient on offense. They want to get as close as possible to the goal line, if not into the end zone. So there's going to be maybe a little less of a reliance on field goals. At least that would be the hope. Because if you're settling for field goals, you're just not going to win games. So that being said, kickoffs is the other half of this equation and something we still need to see from the two kickers. That's why I say, and I believe, that the kicking competition is not over yet. Is Zavada in the lead? Absolutely. Is he the winner? Can't say that right now. All right, Giant fans, coming up next, the NFL is supposed to be having a supplemental draft. The Giants aren't going to take part of it, but I thought it would be kind of fun to take a look back at their history in the supplemental draft, since it is a hot topic, and just see how they fared. That's coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans, running a business shouldn't feel like you're trying to connect a bunch of systems that were never designed to work together. One app for accounting, another for inventory, another for sales, and somehow none of them talk to each other. That's where Odoo comes in. Odoo is an all-in-one business management software that brings every part of your business together into one powerful platform. From sales and accounting to inventory and marketing, everything works in one place, helping your team move faster, stay organized, and focus on growing the business instead of managing software. The best organizations know that success isn't just about talent. It's about having everyone working toward the same goal. And that's true in sports, just like it is in business. You know, in the case of the New York Giants, Big Blue knew it had to revamp its linebacker core in order to keep up with the backs out of the backfield and the tight ends down the middle. So they went out and they landed veteran Tremaine Edmonds, who had been cut by the Bears, and they also drafted rookie Arvell Reese. Great organizations win because operations matter. And that's why you should get Odoo. Try it for free at odoo.com/lockedon. That's odoo.com/lockedon. All right, Giant fans, before we get back to segment number 3 of today's Locked On Giants podcast, get your daily New York Giants fix completely ad-free by joining the Everydayer Club today. Start your 7-day free trial right now and get closer to your team without the interruptions. Click on the link in the show notes or visit lockedonmygiants.supercast.com to claim your free trial. All right, Giant fans, in this next segment, the NFL supplement draft is been a hot topic. Since the supplemental draft is in the news, I thought it would be interesting to go back and take a look at what the Giants have done in the supplemental draft. And quite honestly, it's been rough. I mean, very few supplemental draft picks actually turn out to be good. And there are two that immediately come to mind. They weren't Giants, but two that come to mind include Bernie Kosar, quarterback of the Cleveland Browns, and wide receiver Chris Carter of the Minnesota Vikings. Carter becoming a Hall of Famer. So more often than not, these guys that you take in the supplemental draft, they don't really work out for the long term. So what kind of luck have the Giants had since the supplemental draft was introduced in 1977? The Giants have made 3 picks over that period. Okay, so between 77 and 2025. And by the way, they are not making a pick in 2026. I'm pretty sure I could say that. So in 1992, their very first supplemental draft pick was quarterback Dave Brown out of Duke. Dave Brown, I think, was with the team 6 years. He played 10 years in the league, was 6 with the Giants, 4 with the Arizona Cardinals. Not a very good quarterback. Now, Dave Brown was brought in. It was a first-round supplemental draft pick, which meant that the Giants the following year in 1993, they didn't have a first-round pick because the way it works is if you spend a draft pick on a supplemental pick, you forfeit that same slot in the following year's draft. So not that the Giants did bad that next year because they got Michael Strahan in the second round, Hall of Fame defensive end, but I digress. So the plan at the time, Phil Simms was the starting quarterback for the Giants, and he was nearing the end of his career. So the Giants wanted to have a transition plan in place for when Phil Simms' career was over. George Young at the time was the GM, and he decided Dave Brown was the guy. Now, Dave Brown, he had good size, good measurables and all that stuff, but he struggled, believe it or not, with the mental part of things. A lot of the same problems, believe it or not, that Daniel Jones, when he came to the Giants, also another Duke quarterback, by the way, a lot of the same issues with, reading post-snap, timing, all that stuff, processing. So Dave Brown, just not a very good quarterback for the Giants. And it was kind of weird because at the time, if you remember, Jim Fossil was the head coach. And Jim Fossil had a reputation as being a quarterback whiz, a quarterback guru, kind of like how Brian Dable had that reputation. But Jim Fossil could not bring out the best in Dave Brown, just like Dable could not really bring out the best in Daniel Jones. Funny how history repeated itself, right? So unfortunately, Dave Brown didn't work out for the Giants. A couple years later, the Giants went with a defensive back by the name of Tito Wooten, a safety. Tito Wooten was a 4th-round supplemental pick, and he probably was the most successful of the 3 that the Giants made. Tito Wooten was, a good tackler. He was an aggressive player. He had some decent stats, but the problem with Tito Wooten was he had some off-field issues. There were questions about his prep. There were some allegations about what was going on off the field, including some legal issues that he was accused of. And just everything kind of came to a head with him to where the Giants just decided to say, you know what, that's it. We're going to cut him. We're going to save, I think at the time they were going to save $1.1 million on their salary cap. And they had also just drafted Sean Williams. I think that last year of Wooten's career with the Giants, Sean Williams was I believe a 1st-round pick, a safety, and they were going to roll with him. And I believe it was Percy Ellsworth was the other safety on the team at the time. So the Giants, at the end of the day, they decided that Tito Wooten just wasn't worth it. And they cut him. He finished up his career, I believe, with the Colts, and that was that. But in fairness, I think he was probably the most successful supplemental draft pick that the Giants have had. All right, so the next guy, the 3rd supplemental draft pick the Giants made, 2018, cornerback Sam Beal. Now, Sam Beal, unfortunately, just never got his career off the ground with Big Blue. So that year, I remember Dave Gettleman telling everybody in his statement that, hey, we got our 3rd-round draft pick a year early. The idea was to bring him in, develop him. At the time, the Giants were a little thin at cornerback depth, so they wanted another guy. They wanted to develop him and have him ready to go by the following year at the latest. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. Right from the get-go in training camp, Beal had a shoulder injury, and he ended up missing his entire rookie campaign. And supposedly the Giants said they knew about the injury, but I don't know. If your plan was to bring him on board to get him ready for the following year, could you have really have known about it or how bad it was? I have my doubts about that. Then in the 2nd year, Sam Beal developed a hamstring injury, and he ended up missing the majority of the season. He did return, I think, later in the year, but didn't really make much of a dent. In 2020, you had the COVID pandemic, And Sam Beal was one of the players who opted out of that. 2021, gave it another go. I think he was on the roster for part of the year to start, but then he was waived and signed to the practice squad. So all in all, Sam Beal just never was able to find his footing with the Giants. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. The young man, according to media reports, has been missing for over 11 months. So regardless of how anybody felt about him as a player, we're talking a human being here. And we could just hope that Sam Beal, wherever he is, that he's alive, that he's well, and that he will soon be reunited with his loved ones, who I'm sure are worried sick about where he is and how he's doing and whatnot. So sometimes, folks, life is just bigger than football. And I think, it's important to remember that and mention that. So in a nutshell, supplemental draft, you don't have to worry about it this year, Giant fans. The Giants have a quarterback, so they probably will not be involved with it. And we'll see. Maybe down the line, they'll explore the supplemental draft. It's not held every year. There's been years when they haven't had it, but it's a gamble. Let's put it that way. Bigger gamble than the regular draft itself. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, thank you so much for tuning in, spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Or if you made us your first listen of the day, we appreciate that as well. I will see you next time here on the Locked On Giants podcast.